Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Progcast. I'm your host, Greg Bendian, and today I'm joined by multi-instrumentalist composer John Forensic. Some of you know him just as Forensic, and he, among other really cool things, has a new album out called Another Thrilling Episode. And folks, it's an epic, it's a double album. They still make them.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
got 24 compositions by my guest. And we have had the pleasure of working together with the great Todd Rundgren. So that and the great, late, great Jesse Gress, we'll be talking about all of that today. Welcome, John. How are you?
I'm fine. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. So yes, this album seems to have been a huge undertaking for you. How long did it kind of coalesce?
Uh, it it basically happened that there was so much time during the COVID lockdown and the period of being working in the studio, which I've been doing, and so I wanted to go back and revisit some material that I played years ago, but never really recorded and kind of fleshed it out. And the other part was trying to get everything notated down by using Sibelius, which is this software uh, where you can score everything out and have it available. And I wanted to do that in order to get other people involved so that they would have charts and we're doing everything remotely and sharing tracks over the internet. So that's pretty much how it got rolling, and then it got to the point, well, I have to do something with this. It won't fit on a single vinyl record. It probably wouldn't fit on two vinyl records in terms of the time, but I knew that I could get it on two CDs and then just have sort of that documented and down and release it on CDs. To my chagrin, I've really discovered over time, I mean, it's been ongoing, but uh, I still collect CDs and listen to music in that fashion. Like if somebody makes something, I figure you want to hear it in that particular order, or they want you to hear it in that particular order, and then you can make your judgments later. But as I found, everybody was hesitating about the CD and just streaming it or downloading individual songs that they liked. And not to sound like, hey kids, get off my lawn, but it the idea of having it in sequence and being able to actually hold an item and read details about it away from just being plugged into the internet or your phone uh, was really my goal. I wanted to get it out there in that form, and hopefully that's how people can really appreciate it. I mean, I'm glad that anybody downloads anything off of it, and if they have favorite tunes and everything, I love hearing about that too. But I was happy to share the CD with you so that you could check it out. I thought you might get a kick out of it. So
I got a big kick out of it and love the fact that you're still making music
yeah,
on CD and that you insist on that because I'm a big CD person as well.
yeah,
Um, I feel like I can trust the sound of the CD because it's made to be heard on a system. Once you're putting it through the music, through all of the different sharing platforms, what are we hearing? And sometimes
yeah,
it's a shadow because there's compression involved and there's all sorts of shit
yeah,
that we don't have control over. So
yeah,
this was you putting everything in one place, as I often say,
yeah,
putting it all in one place. And John, it's such a variety of approaches to composition on this record. And
yeah,
I wanted to talk to you about that because we grew up in a time where variety was the order of the day, right? You've got a Led Zeppelin album, there's going to be acoustic and electric stuff on there. There's going to be bluesy stuff, but there's going to be weird modal stuff. So talk to me a little bit about the approach to variety on this record because you want to hold our attention for two full CDs.
Yeah. Well, I my biggest influences early on were like just watching television and TV music and the soundtracks thereof, like the theme to The Man from Uncle or any of the silly
Night
ditties that went
Stalker.
before. Yeah, Night Stalker, really cool stuff. And those composers, as I found out in later life, like Jerry Goldsmith, for instance, they were very influential early on. And and then aside from that, there was just pop music and listening to radio. Originally, the AM radio with the little thing that you'd hold and just, okay, I'm listening to Aretha Franklin 1 minute, and then I'm listening to I don't know. Bubble Puppy, I remember that because it was like, wow, that's really something. And it was like right next to like a Frank Sinatra song on an AM broadcast on a radio. And I thought, wow, oh, well, this is a pop station and they're playing whatever. And growing up in Philadelphia, there was a lot of really great local DJs. Used to listen to Jerry Blavat, the Geeter with the Heater. He would play a lot of R&B music that you wouldn't have heard anywhere else, and it's just wonderful. And being a kid, you don't have a filter on, and later life you become a musician, and then oh, this is better than this and this. But when you're a kid, it's like, oh, I really like this, or this is different, or it just strikes you, and
Yeah,
you know to you know, and then along with doing that and doing all this music for the CD, I knew that I wanted to try to keep the thematic material recognizable and hummable to some extent and captivating. Uh, Simple and so that you could relate to it like you could relate to a pop song, but you could cover a lot more ground. Like biggest influence I think was Frank Zappa early on when I discovered that, and that was like, oh my God, this can be in a piece of music. Or uh, I remember the 200 Motels album as being really something that jumped out with the orchestrations, and then there's like the little tidbits of rock and his guitar and stuff. That stuff all uh, conspired to make me feel the way I do about music. So
That's so interesting. Zappa has been, I think it's funny. He's omnipresent in so many ways, in so many conversations with musicians, and his political warnings from years ago now being pushed into the spotlight. Um, Also the blues influence and the doo-wop influence and the Varese and the classical influence
yeah.
and all of the different things that come together under Zappa, I think made him an intellect for us as much as he was a musician. Do you think that's fair?
Oh, definitely. It's a good way to put it. Perfect.
Um, so I'm curious, just on this tangent of Zappa, is he underrated as a guitar soloist?
Uh, I think so. I mean, it's kind of like, well, to some extent, it's a matter of taste, whatever you like. But I remember that I immediately liked how he sounded. And the first record that it really jumped out for me was Hot Rats, because that
Mhm.
was this instrumental record for the most part, except for Hot Rats, the song. And that sound was, I thought, well, this is really cool guitar playing. I didn't have a, at that point, I wasn't really that much of a guitar player, but I just liked the music in general. And uh, so, yeah, underrated, an interesting variation on a blues guitar player because he does like kind of wrangle the blues out of it in a really raw fashion.
Yeah.
Um, but then rhythmically, this just the way he groups things or spews notes in such odd uh
I like that
tuplets,
groupings, yeah.
yeah, all those like complex tuplets that just sort of come out when he improvises. they're really cool against the steady background because especially later, like with the Shut Up and Play Your Guitar records and
with
things like
Vinny.
that.
Hmm.
Yeah, with Vinny, there's all this rhythmic data along with this melodic, spastic, amazing sounding guitar that really pulls me in. And the times when I play and I get into that zone and I say, oh my God, I really did kind of cop some of that style. And it's like, oh, all right, all right. I'm happy about that. That's a big influence.
Well, it's useful, right? Because there's a clarity to it. I think there's an intent that there's an audible intent in Zappa's soloing. Just for that, just and the commitment to hanging out on an idea or a motif for a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think that's important too, because those little nuggets are like they're like little nuggets of gold scattered throughout the soloing and stuff. Um, So there's that guitar influence. And this record, the other thing we'll just bring up Jesse is originally when I had started into this, I mean, I had talked to Jesse about, and he had heard a lot of the material in its development. And I was thinking that, well, if he's well enough, we'd be able to get him to play on a couple tunes. I've done other records with him, like the first CD that I did. Very much we were playing together in bands, and at that point in time, and he was playing on just about every tune, and it was like that guitar playing was so wonderful to me. And I've played with some really interesting other guitar players along the line, but we really hit it off. We had a lot in common growing up and that kind of thing. Plus, he was a master of being able to cop sounds from everybody from Zappa to Adrian Belew to sounding like George Benson if he had to sound like George Benson, whatever was needed. And the first times that I heard him play, he was playing guitar with Esra Mohawk, who she's originally from Philly. Um, and anyway, she had a band together, and it was like, you got to see Ezra's band. He's got a really great guitar player in it. So when I did see him the first time, he was well into the Adrian Belew thing, and he could. And I didn't know much about Adrian Belew, but I
right.
saw this and I went, "Wow, this is really cool." And then we had a chance to play together. We had pickup fusion band gigs, and we play in some local clubs. And that's when it was clear that he liked my music because of the things that we did that were original that we kind of sneak into the set in a club. He'd go, "Oh, this is really good. Is there more of it?" So that kind of led to the long association that we had. I miss him dearly. He was such a good friend. So, you know,
Jesse was the best, is the best,
yeah,
and I learned so much from him about guitar. You know, again, like you say, when you work with a lot of guitarists, which
mhm,
which we both have, perhaps maybe me even more than you, but it's just like
yeah,
so many guitarists. But Jesse was an amalgam of so many different guitar approaches because he was so consumed with getting getting everything either for later the magazine, Guitar Player magazine, but just as he was building the gigster that he became, all the different ways of he could take any gig,
yeah,
and I love that. And then of course he was also a Todd expert, expert level, right?
yeah, yeah,
So I just wanted to say, having played with Todd on and off for more than 10 years and Jesse always being there, Jesse got me in at the beginning. We knew each other from Tony Levin's band, did a first tour for Waters of Eden. I didn't know who was on the band, and we were the opening act. Richard Leo Johnson and I, drums,
Right.
percussion, and guitar, acoustic guitar duet. Richard had the same manager as Adrian. So we were opening for Tony Levin, and there's this guitar player in the Tony Levin band. And I'm going, I've seen this guy before. I know this guy. This guy's amazing. And then I realized, oh, this is Jesse Grass from '92 tour. When I saw the Second Wind tour, it was Jesse, not Lyle. And then we started talking Todd, and then we started talking Mahavishnu right after that.
Yeah.
So uh, just an incredible friend, so beautiful to hear him in Todd's music, to
Yeah.
hear him in the Mahavishnu music. And we played a lot of Jeff Beck tunes with him.
Yeah.
And, who else are you going to get to play
Yeah.
Jeff Beck kind of stuff? He knew it all. And, uh, and really the only man that I think probably ever got away with correcting Todd Rundgren on how some.
Yeah, well, he did know the music really good, and it could be like if there was some doubt about a part in a song, he would have it down, or he'd be able to teach everybody else in the band what to do, and that was invaluable in that situation. So, what happened, I mean, the way that it led up to Todd Rundgren's gig, and we were playing together in a band, and I had been working with Dave LaRue, the bassist, and at the time didn't know him, but Van Romain, who is a friend of Dave's, and they were playing together up in New Brunswick, and Dave knew about my music as well, and we wanted to cover tunes. We had been playing in local clubs and playing like our different lineups, but I wrote a good bit of material that we played. So, um,
Should we do a quick shout out to Court Tavern?
oh my God, I have memories of the Court Tavern. Now, I don't know if you know this, but this hand does not straighten out. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know about the story of this?
I don't.
Okay. Well, again, it was the first gig with that Jesse was going to play with. The lineup was me, Van, Dave LaRue, and we'd been playing with another guitar player whose name escapes me. He was a pretty good kid. But I said, I know this guy, Jesse Gress. You got to get him in the band. And Dave had some inkling about it. And Dave was at the point where he was being offered record deals. This is like, going back to like mid 1980s. So every night, Wednesday night, there was a gig that he had at the Court Tavern. And that gig, I worked during the day as a computer programmer, and I would get off work and I'd drive from Philadelphia up to the Court Tavern. I'd play all night on a Wednesday night, and then drive back and then show up at work bright and early with very little sleep the next day. Anyway, so this one gig is Jesse was going to be the first person to be there, right? And I was like, oh, this is great. So I got up to the Court Tavern, and it was pouring rain. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, in 19, I think 86. And I started carrying in my equipment, which was like a Fender Rhodes and a big speaker cabinet. And someone had left the door. You used to have to go down these steps if you've played there, right? So you have to go down like a flight of stairs to get to the club. And I'm carrying this equipment. The stairs were soaking wet. Uh, I'm carrying in my speaker cabinet and literally slipped and fell. The cabinet landed on my hand. I had compound fractures, like bones sticking out everywhere. And it was really like the worst kind of thing that could happen to you as a musician with your hands. It's manual labor here. So I'm bleeding. I don't know what to do. I'm thinking like, well, I still have to get the gig. Half my equipment's in, half my equipment's out. Other guys from the band are showing up. the people are like, well, do you need a bar towel for the blood? And it's like, I don't know. Jesse came and he goes, you're going to the hospital. So he's the one that got me to the hospital and in New Brunswick. And then I had to get back to Philadelphia. And, you know, 3 operations later, after having pinned together a year spent in the hand clinic at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital, they had the pioneer of hand surgery that was there. He was a guy that was one of the first people that was able to reattach a hand to a person that was from an injury. Um, that's why my hands is crooked. So that, but again, it was my friendship with Jesse, and that was like one of the incidents that just, he was that kind of guy too. He was, if he saw something that you had to do, he knew what to do. He would do it. He would be responsible, take the chance, and I'm forever indebted on that level too. Um, and then after that point, the band that we had, Dave ended up playing with Steve Morse, and Van as well. And Jesse had moved from Philadelphia at that point to California. So when I did this first CD of mine, it's called Wild Man of Borneo. I should send you that one
I
too.
have it. Jesse
Oh, you
gave it to
do?
me. Jesse gave it to
Okay.
me.
Okay. Well, that was a thing that where he played a lot of stuff on it, and I tried to get him to play a lot of stuff on it. And we had this kind of group thing going on. Um, he took it with him to California, and I believe he used some of the material from that when he got his audition for Todd. Like he had tapes that he did on a cassette. It was on cassette, and I think he gave Todd that. So, there was that connection there too. So I'm indebted for that because that I got to meet living in Philadelphia. I found out later that I was like 1 degree separated from Todd anyway. I knew one of his close friends, and I never. It was like, oh, you know him too, that kind of thing. And he
Well,
was
I'm
really a fixture.
fascinated by
Yeah,
that sort of, what is it called? The outer edges of the Philly area.
yeah,
My son is in the Drexel area right now.
okay,
And Upper Darby,
yeah,
and just knowing who comes from there, and Jesse's Bethlehem.
yeah.
Where were you?
I grew up originally, families from Port Richmond in Philly, which is like a predominantly Polish neighborhood. My father was from overseas, and he's from Slovakia, and my mom was first generation American Polish, from a Polish family. But very early on, they moved to the suburbs, and I grew up in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, which is uh, it had an amusement park there that James Michener wrote his first novel about, um, uh, where he kind of references that he was working in an amusement park. I think it's called get it. I think it's Fires of Spring. It's a James Michener book, but it's an
Cool.
early book. So um, anyway, I grew up around there, and eventually, when I got older and was in high school, I started playing and discovered that I could play keyboards and, you know, rock and roll. I had studied piano and I had taken piano lessons, and I was very much interested in music, um, classical music, and I had kind of a background in that growing up. Um, but rock and roll and being a teenager, and what are girls interested in? They want to see rock bands, just like, you know, and on that impulse, it was like, yeah, I want to be able to play. And I have a brother that played guitar. So that's how I kind of could plink around without knowing what to do. But at least I had a piano background so I could apply what I knew. So kind of self-taught on guitar. Um, and when I went to high school, there was a band that I got involved in, the members of which, one of them is Steve Berlin, who's a saxophonist with Los Lobos now, and of note in that area. But we had a band; those guys were really into Miles Davis. I didn't know anything about this kind of stuff, but the other guys in the band, Miles Davis and jazz and hip fusion, and everybody had a record collection that was enormous. And I started down that path too. And you go from the suburbs, you drive down into Center City, Philadelphia, to Radio 437, and it had this extensive, wonderful jazz record collection all over the map. You could get anything there, but the stuff that they had, it was always like, all right, save as much money from cutting lawns as you can, drive down and buy like 5 albums or 6 albums and come back. And then that was what you did to not getting your homework done or, in high school, listening to records, those kinds of records. So, and the music that we were into, that was Weather Report, Miles Davis, pretty much very heavy, John McLaughlin. Um, uh, and we went to see a lot of people. In Philadelphia, it was McCoy Tyner. You could see him play at in a local club, or Jimmy Smith. I saw play amazing amount of people that came from Philadelphia, through Philadelphia, and
More.
we were into John McLaughlin, so
Yeah.
the Mahavishnu Orchestra. So I had all these other John McLaughlin records,
Right.
the early ones, and then this record comes out, Intermounting Flame. But prior to that, we knew that they were doing shows locally. The Mahavishnu Orchestra was doing shows locally, and the first time I saw them, they played at the Villanova Fieldhouse, opening for Bob Weir and Jerry Garcia. And it was like we kind of knew what this music was about, our crew. So we got to see John McLaughlin. We go there, and this band blows everything out. Just everybody's hair is coming back by just the sheer force and power of this band. And it was wonderful. It was great because they were so good and so new and different. And the music had this like it fusion, but it really rocked hard.
Jazz
That
rock.
indie and that Indian influence with just
And mhm.
the different meters, but everything flowed. So we were like, this is amazing. And then when Jerry Garcia came out to play, it was like, bring back McLaughlin. We were like, boo, because it was so tame and so, so it's like, all right, okay. And then
It baffles me that Mahavishnu was used as an opening band as often as they were, to the point where they had like 8 shows into a 2 week tour opening for Emerson, Lake and Palmer Tarkus.
yeah,
People were leaving during Emerson, Lake and Palmer because they were full after they had imbibed Mahavishnu for probably an hour, could have been 45 minutes, and they'd still be blown out. So they were asked off of tours. So the fact that you saw that, and then they opened for It's a Beautiful Day. Like,
yeah,
some of these things would be crazy, and they were so loud. Were they not
yeah.
loud, John?
Oh, definitely loud. I mean, we were kind of playing loud at that point too, as a
Okay.
as a burgeoning band. But yeah, they definitely it was powerful. Uh, I and speaking of the bands I saw them open for Mark Bolan and Bang a Gong, and I did see him open for Zappa, and it was
That's a tour also.
that tour. I think more after that tour, saw Frank Zappa playing more and more guitar, like stepping out on lead guitar.
And that's why he
Um,
needed Vinny. I mean, first,
yeah,
that's why he needs Chester, and then it becomes like, I need more. So he gets Vinny.
yeah.
Because just it's so true, before and after Mahavishnu. And Ruth Underwood talks about it, folks. Don't take my word for it. Before Frank heard Mahavishnu and what happened afterwards, it's on YouTube.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Please
I got to check
continue,
that out.
John.
So, yeah, I saw them play like 8 times. The other band that was big then too, Chick Corea's Return to Forever. And the first version of that is really my favorite band because I got to see Bill Connors play a ton of times. And he was another guitar player that I think he's a big influence on me in terms of the sound and just the approach in the that lyrical vibrato that's wide, like Todd's vibrato.
Yeah.
And it was like, geez, it's like this fusion band with this guy that's really close to Jeff Beck, but with a, a, a lyrical style that dovetailed with Chick's music so well. Um, Quite frankly, when I saw Al Di Meola on his first run, I was like, well, he's really good, but it didn't have the same impact. And we saw him play live a bunch of times. The first Hymn of the Seventh Galaxy album is really tame to how they were because we saw him play a year ahead of that release of that album at different venues. Um, Really great stuff. Another band back then was Larry
But
Coryell's 11th House. So
yes,
yeah,
but I want to ask you about Bill Connors. He's a
oh,
very interesting figure, right? And you do have to like kind of put him in a different place as to, well, there are a lot of ways people dealt with this concept of so-called jazz rock.
uh-huh.
Bill Connors, who then goes on to do Of Mist and Melting on
Yeah,
ECM,
yeah.
right? So he's a really interesting player. Tell me more about that because I'm assuming that, yeah, you noticed the big difference right away between Demiola and Bill Connors, and
Oh
I
yeah.
love him to the Seventh Galaxy.
Yeah. Well, seeing it played live at one of the gigs, we had a band at that point. I played with uh, Robert Martin, who was ended up in Frank Zappa's band, and actually Robert lived. We went to the same high school many years apart. Rob, he's a bit older, but Bob was in the band. We were two keyboard players. We had a really great guitar player, a great drummer, and a bass player, kind of local legends. And so the drummer in the band, his name is Don Antonelli. He's just a local guy that great drummer, and we played together for years with him. But we all went to see the band play at Bryn Mawr College, which was at that point I don't think it was co-ed. It was like a girls' school, but they had Chick Corea and Return to Forever, and a local fusion band. Maybe you know about. They have one album out, and it's a pretty cool record. It's called Good God from Philadelphia.
No, but I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it's you might find there might be something on YouTube, but uh, those guys were there. We went to the show, and the drummer asked if he could record Chick Corea's band. He had like a Sony cassette kind of deck that, and he put two mics behind the band. So somewhere in my CD collection, I have a version of the live version, and it is a rough sounding recording, but you can really hear how good Bill Connors is on that. Where everything that I've seen, or the Hymn of the Seventh Galaxy, he plays terrific stuff on, is a lot more muted than it was to see it live and see it so many times. It's really cool.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, any
Yeah,
Bill Connors era bootlegs on
yeah,
YouTube. Yeah, because I get totally blown out to this moment by Cosmic Rain.
yeah,
I mean, that's just so powerful.
yeah,
And it's again, like as you say, a simple idea. There's not a lot of material there. It's Stanley Clark composition.
yeah,
But that's the other thing that springs to mind. You've mentioned Weather Report, you've mentioned Mahavishnu, Return to Forever. All these bands live and die, not for me, not on their chops and their flashiness, but on the writing and the musical ideas that they go into.
no, I couldn't agree with you more,
Yeah.
really.
And so we're like spoiled early on, right? It's like, yeah, the Jan Hammer group. There's no guitarist, but there is a guitarist. There's Jan,
Yeah,
and these tunes are amazing.
yeah.
So we were really spoiled.
Yeah, that's definitely it's and I know that you do this for the Progcast, and I always think of prog being more, like Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or that the the
Well,
the
you know what it
English
is?
prog. Yeah.
But you know what it is for me? And I don't know if I've ever talked about this on the show, so I'm really happy you brought it up.
Oh, cool.
Anytime you have a traditional form and people come into it and they bring together elements of different kinds of music, that's a progression in that form. So progressive. And
Yeah.
that's Doug Lund used to talk about
Oh,
there's pre-conventional, which would be amateur or exploratory without or so outsider music. There's
yeah.
conventional, and then there's post-conventional. So for me, any form, any genre where someone is trying to do a new thing with that or a new blend of that is progressive. So
Hmm.
that's really when I use prog not to denote rock, but progressive music in general at large, like what you're doing by exploring all the different forms that you're continuing a spirit that was a big part of progressive rock music, but a big part of music in general, which is instrumental,
Hmm.
not vocal based. Now, not to say that there isn't incredible contemporary classical music using voice and even like John Adams operas now,
Hmm.
but looking at like we had instrumental hit singles. I bought the 45 of Frankenstein.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? So we were also we had Out of Space, Billy Preston.
Hmm.
We had Taste the Honey, Herb Alpert.
No.
So this culture that we grew up where Weather Report could have a hit single.
Yeah.
It's really uh, amazing that we continue that spirit. I think your record does that. All of your projects, probably from high school till this moment, have been imbued with that spirit.
No. That's good spirits.
Right. So we had
Thanks.
really good
Yeah.
nutrition. We had really
Yeah.
good ingredients that we were fed. And when I'm listening to your new double CD, I'm thinking, oh, we had all the same food groups,
Yeah.
you know.
Cool. Yeah.
And it's great. And your guitar playing is great.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, I, the guitar players that I played with over the years, it would be like, oh, that's a trick that they do. Or, Jesse would show me something. There was a period of time where I worked with Jeff Lee Johnson. And and he was another guy. It's like, wow, how do you do that? Okay. I try to do it and kind of approach it. Um, yeah, you pick up things along the way. So, I was going to say there, speaking about Jesse and the other part, the music publishing part and the notation part, that was a thing that we also had in common. I at one point when I was trying to like break out of my piano style, I had a Rhodes, but I felt like I was in a box. I said, I'm going to take some lessons. And another local band that we used to see, well, local artist was Pat Martino, who had a group that played in these clubs. And his keyboard player at the time was Ron Thomas. So at one point I took piano lessons of sorts from Ron Thomas, and he was really into uh, scoring, which got me into scoring. So, like the idea of I had all the ink pens and all the stuff that you could write out the orchestra scores, and I started doing it, pencil and paper, ink and paper, out of that, and collecting scores by Edgar Varese, um, uh, Penderecki.
Xenakis, yeah.
Yeah, and that music was also in the background. Like I would listen to that as much as rock oriented, fusion oriented, or jazz.
It's another world.
It's another world, and it was in balance with the other thing. So later on, when I went to music school, I went for a brief period at Temple University, where I thought I was going to go all the way and get a degree, and I realized it was like sort of the 12-tone serialist. That was the academic thing of the time.
I
Um,
know. Yes, I
and
experienced that. It was rough. Yeah.
Yeah, and they weren't too accepting of anything that
No.
was outside of that at all. It was like, oh well, that's not really important music. You like Mahavishnu Orchestra. I remember talking about things that I liked at the time, and in order to qualify to be in the music school, and I got shut down on that point. And they just going, well, we want to hear you play Chopin. Okay. We want you to play your scales. We
And
need
this is
performers.
true. Around the
Yeah.
same time, we're around the same age.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, is post-Germanic serial music, 12 tone music, really the only way? I mean, I had already been through so many different kinds of music. I was into Cecil Taylor already,
Yeah.
Paul Motian.
Yeah.
And then they're coming up with like Charles Warren. And I
Mhm.
took one lesson with him. And he said, if you're going to study with me, you have to write in my style. That's how I teach. And I had never written in anyone's style for as a learning device because I was so into we should have don't we have to come up with our own thing kind of thing thinking at that time because again we had grown up with if you sounded like somebody else you were jive. If you sound right, if you
Yeah.
sounded just like somebody else who was better or bigger than you, they'd go, he's so and so light or so and so. It was mocked. So the idea that we were going to continue writing 12 tone music, and I have a ton of it, but that we already knew pop. We already
Mhm.
knew how that communicated to people.
Mhm.
And I also knew how their music, and I was part of it too for a long time, wasn't really communicating to people because it's such a, like, it's, if you look at the pyramid, it's such at this point in the pyramid where like the audience diminishes to the point of
Yeah.
intellectuals and, who else?
Yeah.
Academicians.
Yeah.
And so they were selling us that this was the way,
Yeah.
like some Jedi shit. But please tell me about your experience with that.
Well, I was interested in, sort of learning more about music. And I had been at that point, like playing in clubs and nightclubs
Mhm.
and covering, I was in a Boz Scaggs cover band at one point. One of my,
Was it called
uh,
Lowdown, by the way?
no, we had a band called, first, the band that was the fusion band with Bob Martin in it and Steve Berlin was in it, and the Antonelli brothers on bass and drums, and myself, and Bob King on guitar. He's a Nashville guy these days. Um, it was called Skyline, but after a certain point, it winnowed down like we need a job, and we had a band that was just four people, guitar, bass, drums, and keyboards, and we had a front man, and we played at the beginning of the disco era, and just all the band gigs, the rock and roll band gigs started to disappear. And we'd be playing in clubs, and I'd have to sing Lowdown, and I'd have to sing What Can I Say, or
But can I tell
all,
you, I
yeah.
saw Silk Degrees tour in Central Park that summer,
Uh-huh.
and it was kick ass. And that record is bulletproof. I
I
mean, it's
know.
such a funny thing about that record because, like, if you know Boz before and you know Boz, I mean, Boz is just one of the greats, right? So
Yeah.
I just for $3 because my dad was down with that record. Everyone loved that record. So he's like, I'm like $3 a ticket to go sit in Central Park general admission. I know it was $3 and 150 for the balcony, by the way. But full Silk Degrees blowout. And
Uh-huh.
it was undeniable. it's so funny about that because we think about that moment where like, oh, things are shifting, but he meets that moment with great bass parts,
Oh
with
yeah,
really right, good
yeah,
writing, good hooks, and that unique singing voice.
yeah.
Just want to do a quick shout out to Boz on that because really high point in my early live experience was like love the record when I heard it, got to see the tour. I was
Well,
14 or whatever, you know. But yeah, Boz killing.
well, again,
Lido.
I I ended up meeting him because on a Todd gig early on, he played. We played at Slim's, his club in San Francisco, and so and Chasm was on the gig, and so they're talking. It goes, "We got a guy in the band sounds just like you," and I'm standing there like, "Oh shit." So I had to, so it's like I had to do my Boz Scaggs impersonation in front of him.
You
And it's
did.
like, yeah, I did. Why can't you just get it through your head? So and I was like, for me, when I had to do it, I was
Yes, you
like,
heard me clearly now, I said.
yeah, yeah.
Please.
And yeah, really. So what happened was, with the band that we had, we all had to get the pink leisure suits and the things and dress up because that was the only kind of work we could do. And the band would get hired, but at that point, bands were getting supplanted by DJs because it was disco. And so they'd have the disco, and then the band would do its break. And if you did not cover anything that was happening, and all the music that we played that was kind of fun, like tunes by Boston and stuff like that, they got pushed aside for the R&B at the time, Disco Inferno. Um,
Yeah.
all the stuff back then. And so because of
I
the
feel
keyboard players
love.
and that part, what's that?
I feel love.
I don't
That's
think we
Donna
played that
Summer.
one.
Is that, but
Oh,
isn't
yeah,
that
now I
like a
remember.
Giorgio
Marauder.
Marauder?
Yeah, this is like pre uh, when the brother of somebody in the band that I work with brought this record and he said he's playing it and Love to Love You Baby, the
Lots of love
Donna,
you,
the
baby.
first thing I was going over and over again and going like, oh my God, this is really boring.
Yeah.
This is really repetitive, but it's really popular. It was like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
So when in Rome, you have to get Roman. So yeah, Boz Scaggs and Silk Degrees. And also the other thing, tying it back into R&B, Philly is a big R&B town, and the sound of Philadelphia, from Billy Paul forward, the Soul Survivors, the OJs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Stylistics.
Yeah, yeah. And I at one point even had the opportunity to play on some of those sessions. And the the thing that struck me, and I'm trying to remember the one session, can't remember the drummer's name. Last name was Benson. Uh, was it Greg Benson? I can't remember, but Mike Foreman was Sugar Bear, the bass player from uh, Harold Melvin's band. Uh, I wish the name escapes me at the moment. But anyway, he was on there. Roland Chambers as guitar player, and I was the keyboard player. And they were demoing. It was for doing a demo. And when you play with those guys, as opposed to us trying to imitate it, it was like, wow. So this is how they do it. And they would just play a pocket and they'd have a real simple chord chart. And the idea was just to play it until it felt right. And yeah, that's cool. This is cool. All right. And that was an eye opener because the feel of that, and you're a drummer. I mean, it's like once you get into a pocket, they had this pocket that was totally theirs.
I understand.
That's why those records sound the way they do. They sound really amazing. It's really great. You do get the stank face when you're playing with it. It's like, what's the shit?
Yeah, right. You
It's really
get the
cool.
too much funk face.
It's
But yeah,
great.
it's the funk factor on that stuff is like I I see a blurred line really sometimes between the disco and the hip Parliament Funkadelic stuff at that
Yeah,
same period. And you just see like, okay, well, it's like dance music is king now,
yeah,
but how different people do it, how the drums are produced,
yeah.
you know, I just go back to another 45 I had as a kid, theme from Shaft,
Yep.
Isaac Hayes. You know, and
Very
now
cool.
I'm going back into all the Isaac Hayes discography and really, realizing how much incredible music there is there from Isaac Hayes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a vein to be mined. It's really uh, I'm just happy that I was a part of that on different levels. There was one point where I even had a job toward the twilight of the career of Sigma Sound Studios, where a lot of that stuff was recorded. And Joe Tarsia was the owner and the engineer on a lot of those records, all the way from the Cameo Parkway days to the Philly International days. His drum sounds on those records, they're things he came up with, you know. The engineering on that is unique. So I was in that environment, but I was hired at the time because I had been a programmer and I had been playing in bands as well. Um, and it was a point in time where in Japan they were making commercials using American figures, like, you know, it'd be Sylvester Stallone selling coffee or whatever.
Right.
But Joe Tarsi had gone over there for Clarion to talk about car stereos. Like, this is the American touch, the quality of Clarion that the so he had this connection with Clarion, and they were going to produce a karaoke machine, which was at the early stages of karaoke here, that they wanted to bring to the U.S. And instead of it being sort of recorded tracks, it was a MIDI. Everything was a MIDI file of a tune, so that you could go and, as if you had this device, you'd use this program that it could transpose everything for the singer. And I had to I had to go as quality control and get a bunch of American musicians, give them this unit, create MIDI tracks of a number of songs, everything from Somewhere Across the Sea, Bobby Darin, or Mac the Knife, to I Like Bread and Butter, or uh, I've been working on the railroad. All these MIDI files would have to come back, uh, Beatles songs, so forth. And I had this job working there as the king of karaoke, I guess. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of embarrassed about, but it was the one thing in my discipline. It helped in later years, and it helped with playing with Todd. Was you had to listen to all the tracks of these tunes, Stevie Wonder tunes,
Yep.
The Age of Aquarius, whatever, and track by track by track, get every note precisely right. And before the internet, we'd have to do this in America, and then we'd have to uh, ship the audio uh, like overnight it to Japan, and then we'd get a fax back
Mm-hmm.
from that would say track 5, tone is lack. You know, it would be in Japlish. It would be these, like, what are they talking about? You know, if it wasn't exactly, you'd have to have the mistakes put in. You'd have to have everything on the original recording just match perfectly. And you know how MIDI files sound, General MIDI. It sounds pretty
Right.
wanky anyway, but um, God knows it was hell on earth to get everything precise. And a lot of musicians that we did it, they send in perfectly acceptable tracks, but they wouldn't be acceptable in Japan, and I'd have to do all the work to correct every note along every track, everything. So you're spending hours and hours, days of listening to the piano fill in Jailhouse Rock or whatever in order to get exactly the right notes, because otherwise it would get kicked out, you know. And ultimately, the contract fell through. But while I was there and while I was doing that, I was able to get access to the studio to get some of my stuff recorded there at Sigma. and I worked with my good friend John Anthony, who was an engineer there and who helped me do this a lot of my productions. And this last record was totally he was the guy that mixed a lot of it. He's a drummer, so the drums were really the microscope was focused on those performances there. But it all that karaoke thing and the experience of Sigma, like you'd be around there and be like Patti LaBelle would walk in to do a session, or whomever. Teddy Pendergrass, at that point, he was in a wheelchair because of a car accident he'd been
Wow.
in, and he'd have to be brought up in the dumbwaiter kind of way up to the upstairs studio in order to do tracks at the end of his career there too. So it was an interesting time. It was an interesting place to be around that. And Joe was an interesting guy to talk to in terms of recording technology, the stuff that they did there. One of the things they did, he rigged up a radio broadcast station for an AM radio, like a clock radio
Hmm.
that would be in the studio, and they would send the mixes out and list over the air and listen back to it on an AM radio in order to like say, we got to do this. That was
Oh,
really cool.
that's
All the,
fucking amazing, dude.
that
That's
that
amazing.
Yeah, if you know anything about what it is to go through mixes for
Yep.
pop music, it's like that was like that's pretty brilliant,
Because
People are going to hear it on
when
the
I
radio.
teach music production at William Patterson, I specifically say this was coming out of a one speaker in the middle of a dashboard.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it's a speaker shaped in an oval,
In an oval, and it's there. And I want you to hear it that way. So we listen to things in mono
Yeah,
that were in mono. And I go, well, how did they make that work sonically? They had to
yeah,
figure that out. So
yeah,
they'd have to play back on that to a certain degree. That practice goes to this day where we listen to multiple playback systems when we're working on a mix.
yeah,
You got to figure it out.
yeah,
What's the universal EQ factor here?
yeah. It's something. And also, you're listening in a car, and it's like, well, the car is rumbling along, so what is going to
Mm-hmm.
cut through that as well?
Mm-hmm.
So a mix would have to have sound nice in your quiet stereo or your bookshelf speakers, but as you're motoring down the highway, it would still have to make sense too. And again, it'll go, with Todd Rundgren's mixes, they always cut. Those records. The reason that they were hits back then is like you would hear it and you could recognize it anywhere, and it's still to this day.
Let's talk about Todd.
Okay, sure. Okay, cool.
So, when do you first, as a Philly guy, become aware of Todd Rundgren? Is it the Nas?
Yes, that's exactly what it was. Back then, Philly had a really, this is like, I must have been 14, 13, 14, and I got my first AM FM radio. And FM radio back then was like mysterious. The only thing that they had would be like easy listening or Andre Castellan's orchestra
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
that could play on your stereo in FM. So I got a gift, like a Christmas gift, an AM FM radio with like a little, you listen in mono, but a little earpiece. Um, AM FM, and I think it might have even had shortwave on it or something. But anyway, uh, there was WMMR was a rock station, and WDAS, and WXPN. Uh, those stations they would have normal broadcasting during the day, but then they'd have these mid overnight DJs. And they had this one on MMR, which is the Marconi Experiment, and it was hosted by DJ Dave Herman. And
Oh,
so, yeah,
we had Dave Herman in New York.
yeah, 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 Metro Media. Uh, anyway, he would play the local band was the Nas, and he played them. And Mandrake Memorial was another local band. It had that you could hear that there, along with Led Zeppelin or uh, you know, Arlo Guthrie or anything in that was underground or treated as underground at the time. And the Nas came on. I remember like, what's this song? And it opened my eyes. That was the thing that uh, opened my eyes, so to speak. Uh,
And your
and
ears.
yeah, yeah. And it was like, wow, the guitar, the song, it had all these elements like pop music. And I remember I was a kid, and I had my first 5 years were in Catholic school, and then I went to public school, and I was in junior high at this point. And it was a point where kids were started to buy records, and there were a lot of hipster kids back then that they would bring in their uh, at that point somebody had Disraeli gears or something like
You're
that, like
right.
a Cream album, and I brought in the Nas, and we're like, oh, that, like that. It wasn't cool. It wasn't as cool as the British bands or the other things to the other kids. But I thought it was the greatest thing. Um, and
Were
I
they
remember
not a British influenced band?
exactly. Yeah, they were, but
Yeah,
I didn't really put that together. I mean, I liked the Beatles when I was a kid, but I also liked the Monkees when I was a kid.
right. We did. Yeah.
Like it was pop music, and
Yep.
we had all those records and all the Herb Alpert records. That was
Yep.
like another thing I was allowed to listen to. But this was really really cool. And then the record was like, well, this has all these things that like you would hear the guitar playing like Clapton, but there's song structure that was something different that I couldn't put together. That later I'd go like, wow, it's like okay, Beach Boy harmonies or just Jimmy Webb voicings, that kind of thing. You find out this later in life, but at the time I
Vocal
just loved
arranging.
it. Vocal arranging was really cool on it. The lead singer was Stookie, and he was like a local fixture too.
Hmm.
And that voice on that record was really great. And then you could hear Todd's voice as kind of like the second vocalist on it.
Hmm.
But it was like, oh, these songs. Who wrote all the songs? Easy
Were
Todd
you
Rundgren,
able to
Todd
see
Rundgren.
them?
No, no, they didn't gig very much in Philadelphia. It was kind of like they put together this band. They had this image, they had this reputation, and you could buy the record so you could listen to it, and it was being played on the radio. And I used to call the radio station up and say, "Can you play this?" Like a kid, this record, "Open
Sure.
My Eyes" by the Nas. And they would play it. Dave Herman would play it, and that would be I get to hear it again. I get to hear this again. You know, I mean, contrast that to now where you can just press a button and hear anything when you want to hear it. This was like you had to wait for something to be played, or you had to, the most active participation would be bugging a radio station DJ and say, "What is that song? Who did it? It's
I
really
don't
great."
know that there's any experience that matches that now.
No,
Because
no.
that thing, I know exactly what you mean about the preciousness of getting to hear your song until you could get it on a 45, basically, where
Yeah,
you'd have control over, you'd wrest control finally over
yeah,
these. We were fascinated.
yeah,
Man, it was just a different way of consuming music, and it was a different culture. Yeah, the productions for mono. I mean, there were so many interesting experiences that we had that were mind opening because of almost in spite of how offhand they were to
hmm
us. We had no idea that this was carefully like Phil Spector carefully orchestrating for mono.
hmm
We had no idea. We were just hearing it and experiencing it. And it's like it was its own sound world.
yeah,
And the Philly Sigma thing, it's I mean Philly in general is such an interesting to this moment, I think an interesting music scene.
yeah.
My son's 23 now, drumming on this scene. He's playing in 5 different bands,
Oh,
and they're
wow.
all doing different levels of what music is right
Yeah.
now, from vocal to fully proggy instrumental.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear him play. That'd be a cool thing. Gotta let me know.
I will. But yeah, so I know that I came up in the New York scene, but the Philly scene has always been undeniable from the Brecker brothers to Coltrane,
Yeah.
to all of the Pat Martino, man. I mean,
Yeah.
it's an incredible
Yeah.
wellspring of stuff.
Well, I always found that it was, if you're a musician, it's great to say you come from Philadelphia. There's so many. The other thing in Philadelphia is bass players. It's like a town of bass players. You
That's
can go
right.
Reggie Workman to, oh God,
Christian,
yeah, um, Stanley Clark.
Stanley,
Uh, uh,
Victor,
I'm just blanking on his name, and I know the guy.
Victor
um,
Bailey,
Victor Bailey is. Ah, how can I do this? Yeah, it'll come to me at some point.
Gerald Veasley.
That's who I'm trying. I couldn't think of his name. Gerald. Yeah, Gerald's great. Actually did like one gig with him where they roped in to play guitar, and this is when I wasn't as good a guitar player as I am now. This is a little earlier on, but I was such a thrill to play with that band. It's just sort of like an improv jam. You just have to get up there and jam on a bunch of stuff. I had a lot of fun, but wonderful person and just a wonderful bassist, you know. Um, yeah, there's great stuff. It's a bass player town. And
That
I
too.
mean I've picked up bass as a part of that. I figured I couldn't tell somebody else what to play on their instrument unless I had an idea what to do. And there's been a couple times where with Todd, I ended up subbing for Chasm, for he had his Todd Fest, one of his birthday parties out in California. And then there was a South by Southwest showcase that he did, and they needed it. And Chasm wasn't available for it, and I was able to do that. And those were like the last two times I was able to play out with Todd. But I had a blast because for me, bass is like that. I'm discovering things on the instrument in a way that with keyboards, it's like, okay, getting away from what I always do out of habit and out of practice. This is something that I have to shed on a little bit. And even to the point where I made my own version of a precision bass by, from parts. And it, it's important to me to like be able to know every part of an instrument that you have to work with. So, and the final frontier actually for me is drums. I really do have respect. Your talent's wonderful. A lot of respect for drummers. It's just
Thank you.
it's a great thing. It's a great thing that you guys do, and it's great to hear it, and it adds so much life to the
What you
music.
kids over there that you're doing with the things?
Yeah,
Very, very
exactly.
nice. Very
I love
nice.
that. I love that about what you're doing.
That thing you're doing over there, keep doing it.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, man.
yeah.
It's so inside of Todd's music, and you've heard the Nas. Do you continue to follow him into the first Utopia like Jesse did?
Yeah. I After the Nas, there were the first Runt album. I remember I got that on Ampex Records, and I remember there was two versions of it. One had like an extra cut on it or whatever. I had one of the versions of it. Um, the second Runt album, I've only heard like one or two songs off of it at this point. I haven't gone back to like discover what that's about. I skipped over Something Anything, but I had heard all the songs on it. And at that point, my interests were divergent. Uh, but when A Wizard of True Star came out, and I got that, and at this point, I was really into Frank Zappa, and I heard this record, and I was like, oh wow, it's like one full side that just goes together, and it's all these different musical styles that are segued into one another, and sound effects and so forth. And I was like, this is the shit. This is
Hmm.
really cool.
Mm.
And it was a hard thing to like. You liked it, but you're kind of in the minority back then. A friend of mine said, he's not doing his songs anymore, or this weird record. And I
Prague,
just thought it
though.
was great.
See, now
Yeah,
there I would say Prague. I mean,
exactly.
he's going into Seven. He's going into other sound worlds. It's
Yeah.
so post Zappa. I'm really glad you brought that up because on makeweirdmusic.com, you can see me talking to Todd about Prague and what his ideas of Prague were at that time. And
Uh-huh.
guys in Utopia had different views about European Prague versus US Prague and what that Prague did include jazz rock. And that's
Uh-huh.
very interesting to me because he considered Mahavishnu to be Prague.
Yeah.
So, it was a really wide playing, big tent, wide playing field. And you heard Wizard, and you're right. It's so Zappa. Did you get to see him live at all around that time?
No, the first time I ever got to see Todd play live was the a cappella tour, that way down the line. Um, and the first Utopia albums, the first two Utopia records, uh, they were Another Live and the first Utopia record. Those records I liked a lot, and I thought that dovetailed with my love of Mahavishnu Orchestra and fusion, and it was like wow, and I came to appreciate like well Todd's guitar work. It's like those guitar solos.
Let's
That
talk about that for a minute because
yeah,
I'm also there at that moment experiencing that and going, Roger Powell's a motherfucker,
yeah, guy's great. It was really cool.
right? Like
Yeah,
Mr. Triscuits
yep,
on the live album,
yep.
some of Todd's best sounding stuff, the keyboard solo. What is that lead sound that Roger has? It's like a saw blade. It's crazy.
I know he was a endorser for ARP, I think, ARP synthesizers. So it might have been an ARP.
But he's so
Um,
programmed. No one else had that
yeah,
sound. Not even Jan had that sound.
yeah. He, well, again, he's like one of the synth players that had a voice on a synthesizer that you could go like, wow, this is pretty cool. I think of uh, Jan Hammer, obviously, Roger Powell, um,
Not talked about
Josette.
enough. Roger
Yeah,
Powell not on enough people's tongues.
yeah,
And I think that they're missing out. Go back to Cosmic Furnace.
yeah,
Find his solo material. Roger Powell, and then his contribution to Utopia from the moment he steps in.
yep.
I
Yeah,
think,
the Cosmic Furnace record is really wonderful. The sounds and stuff, and plus his keyboard stuff. It's like, wow, this is really inventive. Uh, it's challenging, but it's accessible at the same time. Music, and
is it not also his involvement in Cosmic Fire, treatise on Cosmic Fire on initiation?
yeah, that was another record that I had that I played to death. And I remember thinking it was a shame because there was so much it was like one of the longest records ever recorded at that time, the longest
Right.
amount of music. So I think I ruined like two copies of it, just because you'd play it and play it, but the grooves were so shallow that like unless you were extremely ginger with it, or you had a really good record player, you'd end up like, okay, there's the skips are starting, the static's starting. But I used to listen to that a lot, and just the fact that it was so trippy, it was great.
I still love treatise on Cosmic Fire. It's my son's favorite Todd tune, and it's Andy Partridge of XTC's favorite Todd tune.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I
Wow.
love that I just called it a tune. Anyway,
Yeah, it's a
you know
it's a
that
little
tune.
that little ditty.
Come on, man. That
Yeah.
was a single. That was a single. It was taken down from the original key because the original key was sped up so that they could fit more of that onto the vinyl. Did you
Uh-huh.
know that the whole thing was sped up a whole step?
No, no, I had no idea. I mean, I just
Yeah.
went, okay, now I'm going to listen to it again and to
Yeah. Try to
think of
and go
that.
online, people, and try to find the single version of Prana. I think that's what it's called because it's
Okay.
that particular harmonized guitar movement that I'm talking about, melody. And that was the B-side to Real Man. So that's a really cool B-side thing. But yeah, I mean, Roger Powell and getting to see them live and him with the Powell probe stalking the stage,
Yeah.
that was, you didn't get to see that a lot.
Nope.
And very happy got to meet him, I don't, I hope he's, hanging in there. I know, he's not been playing,
Yeah. Well, I know he had a day job that was pretty uh well, the lifestyle of a musician can only go so far unless you get really lucky. And I know that he's a computer whiz
Yes.
guy, and that probably goes a long way to fit with why the music's the way it is, but also you can have a life outside of music. That if we wanted to talk about computers and that kind of thing, it's like, yeah, that's a whole other world, a whole other lifestyle. It's got its ups, its downs, it has its finer points. Um, but music is the best as far as I'm concerned. It definitely has sort of a spiritual component that you don't get elsewhere in other forms of employment. So yeah, music's it. Yeah.
Favorite Todd song with Utopia.
Oh man, I'm trying to think of something from Swing to the Right. Well, um, ah, well, this I loved his version of for the for the love of money. You know, their version of it. It's an interesting take on the OJ's version of it.
That's
Um,
that's the era of Utopia that you're going to. You're not going to classic early Utopia.
well, oh no, like the first Utopia album, it's the whole record. I love that record. That
Freedom
was like
Fighters,
Freedom Fighters and Freak Parade
Big Parade,
and
yeah.
just the the
Icon.
the instrumental that leads into Utopia, where his vocal breaks in, and then there's that wait, and then he hits those guitar notes. Ugh, goose pimples. Ooh, I
Very
got the
much
goose pimples.
so. There's
You
there's
know,
really a
it's really
vibe on
cool.
that record. Yeah. Yeah.
Really cool. Um, yeah, I with I don't know a lot of Utopia's music because I always gravitated to Todd's solo releases over time. So there's like this kind of gap. And then when the Tortured Artist Effect came out, it was like, oh, I like this record again. This is pop music, but I really like this pop music,
There
I really
goes your
kind of,
baby.
yeah.
Really strange chromatic stuff going on there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the interesting thing about to me, his compo if I think about Zappa or Todd, with Zappa, it had a lot more to do with note to note and notes. And with Todd, it's a kind of he he can take a style and just ram it into something that works with something else. The way the vocals are arranged, the way the music and the chords come out, and then it still is a pop song, but the fact that it borrows from these sources, like Jimmy Webb is one thing that I remember that those kind of they're like major seventh chords, but it's kind of like the the dominant over the root of the tonic that and with all the extra notes the fourth inserted into the triad or the suspended second it gives it this really nice texture, kind of like how you would arrange horn parts if you want them to really pop, close together voicings that you can do on a piano,
Put the
not so well on the
seventh,
guitar.
put the seventh next to the one. It's like
Exactly.
Jesus. Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah. And
As
also
Jesse
just
would call them. Jesse would call them what? T
uh
chords.
T chords
Yeah.
for Todd chords.
Yeah. Those
I
are
just
T
remember
chords.
I just remember his piano style with it's like when he plays a chord, this finger is sort of just poking up like a little animal. And it's all these like little tight voicings, so it's a funny look. And if you're a piano player, you go like, okay, you're not using your middle finger? Well, all right, I have to use my middle finger. In this case, in this hand, this middle finger is always kind of in the way because it's always
It's
bent
so
into it.
funny, John. I have to tell you, my son at an early age, when he was taking or playing piano a lot, he figured out Drunken Blue Rooster because he figured out the hand positioning of it and just had to
Okay.
figure out the two hands and it was so much fun to realize, oh, that's playable for a kid,
Yeah.
like it's neat. It's a fun idea.
Yeah.
And then it's like there's a way you can figure it out. Those are, it's interesting when he ultimately will stop playing keyboards and has for
Uh,
years. But what did you find most challenging about his keyboard parts?
well, not so much the technically playing a keyboard, but more about having to have all the sounds organized, which is kind of like it's kind of the cross you bear when you're the keyboard player and you have to play all the parts. There's the sax part. Here's a song that has this. And to me, I'm like, I was always Mr. Factory preset, or I just wanted to play a Fender Rhodes or a regular piano or a Hammond organ, like those, the big three. And, I have a mini Moog and I would do my Jan Hammer stuff with that. But with Todd's stuff, it would be like, okay, the bridge has this sound in it, and it's only these five notes. So go into the keyboard, go into the synth, go into whatever software is producing it, and map out everything. And that took more time than actually learning the song. You'd learn the music and you go like, okay, the chords, all right, I think that's the voicing. But a lot of the time leading up to the rehearsals, if we had to go on tour, I had spent trying to set up a keyboard where I could get to these sounds right away. And when I first played with Todd it was the Individualist tour. Um, I'd never done anything like that. And he was the one that kind of showed me. He said, well, you have the rack unit. Can you understand what this is? I said, yeah, I've only ever used a keyboard to drive a sound on a rack unit, and it was 88 keys left to right, low to high. And he goes, oh, well, you can, split it so that, your middle C is really way up here, and that's going to play this part. And then you only need those four notes. So just those four notes play this sound, and that'll be that part of the song. Save all that, next song. So you had like these multiple presets. And the hardest part about doing the gig on keyboards was you get a set list, and I'd have to get one ahead of time in order to go like, oh, this song, this is the one with the trumpet parts, and it needs this synth patch, and that's that on the computer. And then I'd have to think, get on stage, and the whole time I'm playing one song, I'm looking at the next song because there would be no time to hop to the next tune and have it ready. And God forbid you weren't ready
Mhm.
in time
Mhm.
and there was some kind of glitch, you'd have to kind of like, you know, develop a pattern on stage in order to get through it and not get in trouble.
Right.
The show would hang up and you get the stink eye and you go, oh shit, well, my fault,
But
sorry. you know
look, I was on uh King opening for King Crimson in 2000. They're all playing in laptops and they were all crashing.
yeah,
Every show they had to stop for crashing.
yeah,
But it's funny because you answered a question that I really wanted to address, which is what is the keyboard gig in Todd's music and the eras of sound
yeah.
and how to get through it all on as little gear as possible.
Yeah, yeah, that's the other thing. What would happen would be in the early days, they would make arrangements for you to have your own gear. And that was great because I'd set up everything that I knew. We go to rehearsals, they take it out. Next gig, take it out. It's familiar. When it got to the point where you needed backline, um, I was still at the point where I wasn't using a laptop or anything that you could just MIDI up with anything that was there. So he'd say, "What's available? What does the backline company have?" Oh, it's a Yamaha. Okay, if they have this Yamaha, I have to get the manual for that Yamaha ahead of time because I couldn't, or if somebody I knew had a Triton or which I didn't have, I'd say, can I borrow it for a little bit, like a week before I have to go out and see what it's like. So I'm not just fumbling around, but there's a lot of that happened on the tour. And I'll tell you one anecdote with the Liars tour,
Mm,
which ended up being really successful, but the rehearsals started out and at that time, Todd was used, and he still probably uses Reason, the software, to generate the music and the sounds, and he wanted that to happen. But in order to make it happen, the approach was we're going to get compact laptop tablets, the one that's a computer that used to split, like open
okay.
up, and everybody's going to run Reason, and that's going to be it. So we got the rehearsals in Chicago and he also had an idea for the lighting, and they built these structures using LED lights, which was pretty novel at the time.
And wasn't Prairie in on the design?
Um, I believe so. Yeah, I believe he was in the design of a lot of stuff for the previous Tiki tour. Um,
Shout out to
and
Prairie Prince.
yeah, uh, but we were at rehearsals and Todd was focused on the lighting while we're trying to get the stuff to work and nothing worked. And I remember going into it, and I had brought my keyboards with me on that tour, an 88 key PC, Kurzweil, a an old Ensoniq uh, VFX SD, and that was it. And leading up to the tour, I had to learn all the songs. So I programmed everything onto my equipment, which we weren't supposed to be using when it came time to the tour. When we're at rehearsals, nothing's working. The computers, you can't get the programs to work. And it was like, well, this is totally uncharted territory, but it has to get ready for the first show. And so I remember Todd kind of walking out after like the last rehearsal and going and like Kazan goes turns around goes like, all right, what the hell are we going to do now? So all right, Jesse, musical director, he musical directed it into shape. I already had the sounds that I had rehearsed with, so we were going with that and developing it in order to fit the show even tighter. And that's what we toured with, the sounds that I had come up with to imitate. And that became my operating mode up until the last tours that I did, full on tours in 2016. It was the last tour I did with him on keyboards. Um, as much of the backline stuff that I was familiar with that I could program quickly on the fly, it helped on the last couple tours that they were more like an evening with Todd Rundgren or greatest hits tours, that kind of thing.
And
So
we
that
did
you,
a greatest hits New
yeah,
Year's show.
yeah,
That
the New
was
Year's Eve
fun.
show.
That was a great set
Um,
list. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
on
that,
YouTube. Yeah.
and it was like, okay, this is pretty straightforward. You can show up with backline and play. Um, yeah, that's the keyboard gig. I mean, and you just had to have it right. If you wasn't right, you'd hear about it uh, on stage, you know. Um, if it could be a pretty humbling experience. But for the
Oh,
most part, yeah, yeah,
we've all been there. And
yeah,
shout out also to the great Mary Lou Arnold and, Jesse's partner forever and just such an amazing part of the Todd experience for me
yeah,
and shepherding me through uh not getting fired and how how to deal
Yeah.
uh, with with his genius and play his music faithfully.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting kind of its own vernacular in a way,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so insistent on backing vocal arranging being performed live, and I love that about him. I don't get to sing on that gig. I wish I would, but you guys, all did
Yeah.
vocals, and the vocals were always in place, and
Yeah.
Chasm takes it real seriously.
Yeah.
I
Well,
did an interview with Michelle and Chasm and talking about the a cappella tour on Make Weird Music, and they talked about his very particular uh, ear for the vocal stuff and the
mhm.
arranging. Um, and it's interesting because Todd says, everything he needed to know about vocal arranging, he learned in high school chorus class.
Yeah, he's has a really good ear for being able to just kind of line up the vocals that you have to do. Another thing about the gig is up to that point, before Todd, I sang occasionally in bands, but now I have to sing a lot of parts, and Jesse was the one that told me, he says, all right, get ready for it because it'll be the last day of rehearsal and he'll go, this is your part, this is your part, this is your part. And back then you'd have a cassette player and you'd go, okay, all right, listen to it. And then you just go back into your hotel room and panic and go like, what are my notes? What? Okay, I got to sing this part. And then the first shows were like, oh God, just when I think about it, it was just nerve wracking. You were just
What was
very
flipped?
little. What's
Little
that?
thing? What was the difference between the what you had learned and then what you had to do?
Well, what he would, whatever the songs were, they had a lot of vocal parts, but most of the time in the earlier rehearsals, I remember that you're spending a lot of time playing the music to get the music right. And then I was expected to sing, and there would be parts that you would play that had nothing to do with what you had to sing, which is, you know, I think it's really hard for people like playing guitar parts. Usually the bass player he's only playing one note at a time. So, if you can get that together, that's good. The keyboard part, if I had a note in the chord that I could hear that note and come up with it off and then be able to come in and sing it, at least I had the chord in front of me, so I knew where I fit in the range of things, and but there was you either have to kind of figure out what you might be singing before you even got to rehearsals, because by the time you got to the end of rehearsal, the last thing you were getting together were the vocals, and I just remember the first tour, uh, it was like the last 2 days of vocal. It was like, well, here are your parts. And, and meanwhile, you're still struggling with the tune. I go, okay. I usually ended up having a higher falsetto part. I used to sing the top vocals and a lot of stuff. Um, Chasm has a much fuller, higher range, and Todd as well. And I have a split between my this. I mean, I'm not a singer. I like to think of myself as an instrumentalist before I'm a singer, but my vocal range goes up to a certain point, and then it really has to shift to falsetto,
Right.
and making that divide. I'm never happy with it. I don't necessarily do a good job. So if I can stay up in the falsetto the whole time or in a full voice,
That's what I
I
did with the musical box. When I sang the Phil Collins parts at drums, they were all above Gabriel in the falsetto range.
yeah,
And you get your falsetto together so that it sounds in tune and it's like it's cool, but it is falsetto.
yeah. It's not, and it's funny too, because when you think about pop music and it's recorded, the versions that are recorded, the singers, every song is full range, da, 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 da. But when you have to play all those songs in a row, it's a physical feat. I mean, it's two little muscles in there that get the biggest workout, and it's something that the night after night with Todd. I know that in the last tour, he broke the tour down so that it seemed like they were only ever doing two nights in a row with a day off, which is pretty good, particularly if you have to sing all that stuff. And
Yeah.
the last tour that I saw him, I said, man, his voice is really happening.
Yeah.
When we were touring, if we had 3 days in a row, by the third day, he might be really struggling, or there was times when his voice was gone. Um, I think we played in I forget the gig in Austin. Um, Armadillo World headquarters was still in, and we played there. Um, but his voice was totally shot for this show. And we're like, what are we going to do? I mean, he was having trouble getting through the song. And at that point, we never transposed anything to make it easier on the spot. Like it's like, take it down a key. All right. Used to have to do that all the time. With him, he always sang it in
Oh, he's
whatever
always
pitch
at
it to.
at original key. Yeah.
There's been only one time where he dropped it down a step, and I was like, shit, So, and on piano, dropping things a step or a half step, the fingerings can be all different. And unless you're really doing it all the time, thank God for keyboards that you can change the transposition. But then I'd have to know what's the next song? Do I transpose it? That kind of thing. So, but only one time
Only
that
one
he did
time.
that,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, I don't miss that part of the gig at all because it's nerve-wracking to have all the sounds ready on the piano. I like to dig in and play the instrument and get into it. Um, and we had, to Todd's credit, we did get chances to do that in the last couple tours when he did Born to Synthesize, and it turned into an extended jam.
Hmm.
Very lots of extensions there. It went on for a bit, but it was fun to be able to loosen up and play like that. And I'm really grateful for that too.
So great. Yeah. And the Unpredictable band that I came in on was playing synthesize. And it had all of its sections and events, and
Yeah,
everybody got a taste, and it was always a bit of a thrill ride where
yeah.
you didn't know what was coming next and how many you were borns, or like, is it nine? Jesse, I'd be like, Jesse, how many is it? He goes, I think it's seven. I remember that on a couple of hits. I'm like, Jesse, how many? Is it always the same number? He's like, yeah, but also look, when he goes to the mic, when he puts the mic on the stand, that's the last time. I'm like, that is consistent. Okay. Like, you're learning
Yeah,
all these
yeah.
like
it's like
little triggers.
you'd have to pray to see the mic stand. I can't see the mic stand.
Like, where's the mic stand?
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
There were there that was a challenge to get through it. I had a lot of fun with that too because another thing that happened on the Tiki tour at one point, it developed that we're on a bus ride, and he started talking about we're only in it for the money by the Mothers of Invention, right? And so I know all the words on that record, and I was losing status at the high school and all these songs like that. But I also knew how to play America Drinks and Goes Home, and he started singing that on the thing, and I was like, oh, okay, So at a sound check, I started running through that song. I know it's that pretty ingrained in my repertoire.
Yeah.
Uh, so it got put in the show, and it was always fun to do because I could play, and it was like you're really accompanying uh, a torch singer and goofing around with it, but having fun with it at the same time. And I could come up with my own little parts for it and flesh it out. And that was fun because it made it an event. I really felt that's generous, I think, in the part of Todd's. Here, you have this to do. You're making it something. It's working out for me, so this is good. I love that. That was wonderful. It was a lot of
And
fun.
and that's a really interesting tour, John. That's that's with the twist stuff.
Yeah.
And Jesse's arranging a lot of that stuff. Was Jesse the MD on that?
Yeah, the whole reason all the way along for me, and the reason I could do the gig was he was in the gig and we could talk about stuff in detail, in musical detail, in a way that you know, that made it work so that I could get on board with the least amount of trouble. Um, yeah, he was a musical director for that. We recorded that record. That's the only thing that I ended up playing on with that recording. And the recording, I thought when I
And
got
Liars
done,
Live DVD.
yeah, the Liars Live DVD was, yeah, but that was the show. The album with a twist was what led to the Tiki Tour. And
Mhm.
we had flown out to Hawaii. Todd was living out there at this point, and we had rented a house that was formerly built for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So it's this big house where everything is built to giant. You're like in a giant house. You feel like Land of the Giants. The you'd have to get on steps to get up to the bathroom sink, in order to use it because it was built to his scale. And then we just set up like a home recording in sort of the lounge fireplace area of the place. Todd draped blankets over a staircase and got under staircase, so he had his vocal booth. Chasm just went in direct. I remember that it was Hawaii, Kauai. No one had equipment there, so they were scrounging around on the album to find like a make do uh, mic stands. Uh, Drum kit was like kind of cobbled together. It wasn't like a full on SIR provided studio kit or anything. Um, and my keyboard was the 61 note synth. I forget what it was. It had true broken keys on it, and I could only play the simplest parts or come up with the simplest parts. And Jesse would every night would get a song and work it up. Todd would have a suggestion. We listened to some version of a Brazilian, samba or something. And he goes, "Hey, like this with this kind of organ sound or whatever." And then it was like, "All right, well, we have to put this together." And Jesse would really do the arranging of it. He was really the arranger on that record. So then we recorded this stuff. Todd sang it. I think at one point I had to do a piano solo, and it was like you don't get a chance to overdub. It's like we're done. Okay, no, that's all right. And I was like, could you do it again? Can I punch that? No, no, that's it. And I was like, oh, okay. And I thought, man, I sucked on this. And I thought this record's going to suck. And the next thing I hear, he comes back. He's done he physically put in the extra parts, massaged it so that some things got away with. I I remember the song I had like a little piano solo on, and it's recorded somewhere. It's available on one of his releases. One Long Year, I think it is. I could be
Oh, it's
wrong.
the Tiki piece on One Long Year. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a piano solo in that I thought, oh, and it's not great, but it's the piano solo. It's part of that performance. It makes it onto there, and I'm like, oh, okay, you know. I wish I could have done
Yeah.
better, but that's,
I'm on the Unpredictable DVD that went out with the Global album. And uh, I'm really happy that that night what he allowed me to use a bass drum because he started the gig. He was like, "This is not a drum set gig. This is a percussion gig." I'm like, "Okay, cool." And then they're playing at rock volume, and Jesse's looking at me like, "Sorry, man." And I'm like, "Jesse, can I ask?" He goes, "Yeah, just ask him." So I said, "Todd, I didn't know we were gonna like rock out and be pared down, and I'm struggling just having percussion. Can I have a bass drum?" He's like, "Yeah, you can have a bass drum." And I got an 18 and I
yeah,
pulled it, and I'm like brought it in, but
yeah.
it's so interesting when you're kind of like at point, right? You're at a point where you just you're gonna have to go, look, I want this to really work. And if that's going to be the case, I'm not going to play it or use it on every piece. Like on Dream Forever, I'm just doing bongos.
Uh-huh.
but
I used to do that on that song too, and I would sit in on bongos. I was bongo boy for a while. Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Well, John, it's so cool that you're doing your thing. And where can people find another thrilling episode?
It's on Bandcamp at forensicbandcamp.com or bandcamp.com/forensic.
No, no, it's your
Yeah,
name and then .bandcamp.com.
yeah, yeah. I haven't studied myself up for this interview, but that's
Trying
the
to help
place.
out here, John. It's
Yeah,
it's
no, that's great. And
forensic. Is it just forensic? It's not John Forensic.
it's Sean. It's whatever gets me to the dinner table is
Okay.
works.
Yeah, so
Um,
forensic dot
yeah,
bandcamp dot com.
yeah, forensic.com is my website, and from there the links branch out from there. The
Can they
CD
buy
is
physical CDs?
they can buy physical CDs through Bandcamp, you know. And that's been that for my first foray into doing that, as opposed to marketing separately or having Amazon sell it or other retailers sell it. And it's available in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Record Exchange, and hopefully other outlets elsewhere. I have some help in that direction. Uh, one of the Todd's faithful and a wonderful person, Fred Jeske, has been helping me along. He's into the music, and he's gotten the CD to some places out in the Midwest and to Wisconsin, I believe. So, I mean, that's where things sit at this point. At this point, it's onward and upward. I've looking forward to doing the next thing, and right now I'm in a hiatus point. It's summer. It's hotter than hell, so I'm glad to be in the studio because it's cool in here. But but it's taking a break. Um, so try and enjoy life as it is, as it comes.
I think we all are kind of dealing with a very hot summer and what it means to be indoors and what will be done.
Yeah.
And today the AC is off, and
Oh,
I'm getting away with it as much as possible because I saw my bill.
oh,
So yeah, John,
tell me about it.
you're the best.
Yeah.
And this is the new album, everybody, and it's in also dedicated in memory to Jesse Gress,
Yeah.
who we all love and miss very much. And John, so much great music history, and I love talking to you about it. And I thank everybody for listening. I thank John Forensic and all his cool stuff that's going on. John, we have to keep do this again, I think.
Okay. Well, maybe get the chance to play together again too. That would be
I
wonderful.
certainly hope so. Everybody, please hit us on Patreon. Also, love to hear from you at bendianmusic.com, where you give me your favorite episodes and
Yeah.
tell me some of the people I should be getting on the show because I do try to get as many tentacles into as many areas as possible. And if there's something I'm missing, I'd love to know about it. And you can also reach me there for lessons and correspond with me there. So everybody, thank you so much for watching the podcast. My guest has been the great John Forensic and his new album, Another Thrilling Episode. See you guys next time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Greg.
My
Take care.
pleasure, buddy.